How many of you have experienced denial of service attacks in the past? Yeah. My first one was in about 2016 when there was a Mirai attack on DynCorp and much of the DNS system went down. And then the press was on my phone. It was an exciting day. So, are they still happening? You bet they are. This is from just a couple weeks ago when there were a series of denial of service attacks on Microsoft and OneDrive went down. Some of you may have experienced that. Not a fun day. So the work we're doing in this space is, it's me, Bill Lair, who's a regulatory economist, and a group of our students, is to turn this problem on its head. What we're trying to do is begin with mitigating those attacks a priori, as opposed to the current status, which is that we wait until an attack happens, and then we begin to try to solve the problem. We are doing this in part by putting a burden back on the attackers themselves, which is not the case right now. Right now, they have a very easy time of it. And finally, we are providing a more interesting, more effective set of tools for evaluating the efficacy of what we're doing. So, what is the problem that we're facing here? To begin with, we have a collection of attackers. These tend to be botnets. They are ranging in size from about 10,000 to hundreds of thousands of bots that are recruited to send attacks on command to a victim. We have in this space a large collection of companies that have stepped up to actually try to provide mitigation to the victims if they can't do it themselves. We see that there are a number of different kinds of attacks that are happening. And I'm not expecting you to actually read those numbers, but on the right-hand graph there, this is from two of the companies that are providing these kinds of mitigations. Kaspersky was reporting last year that over 50% of their traffic was UDP traffic, that they were UDP attacks. The red and yellow parts of that graph are TCP attacks. So the vast majority of what they're seeing are layer 4 protocol attacks. Down on the lower graph, we see Microsoft reporting the other way around. The majority of the traffic they're seeing is TCP. UDP plays a slightly lesser role, but again, layer 4 traffic is really the vehicle for providing these attacks. Finally, if we look at the scale of the industry in this space, Statista reported that in 2018, the business was at about less than $2 billion. In 2023, it's gone up to over $4 billion. So this is a growing business, growing set of problems. So let's look briefly at what set of problems are here. There are two general classes of attacks that we're talking about. Those that have actually targeted attacks in which the traffic has been converted into something malicious. The other kind of attack is volumetric attack, which is what we're starting with right now because the majority of the attacks really are volumetric attacks. These are attacks where the traffic itself looks like completely legitimate. They're very hard to recognize because they are just legitimate traffic. Examples of this are UDP, TCP, and so forth. And in the example I'm going to give you, we're talking about TCP SYN packets, which are the very first bit of traffic that is sent to set up a TCP connection. They're used for a great majority of the kinds of attacks. The distribution, as I said, these are being generated by botnets typically, and in many cases, in the kinds of traffic we're looking at, where they're using spoofed addresses, which means those are not legitimate addresses, which means it's very difficult to find the attackers. Finally, if we look at the costs that are incurred here, the attackers themselves are bearing very little of the cost. The victims and anybody that they pay to in those large companies are in fact bearing the burden of the cost. So what we are doing is trying to turn the problem upside down. What we expect is that our attackers will have to bear some of the burden, do some work, use some of their resources in order to send traffic. If they don't, their traffic will be dropped automatically. So what we're doing is realigning the burden of the cost here. There are several different sets of issues that arise in this space. One is the nature of the attack. Another is the nature of the application or the use of the resources that's the good work that you're trying to get done. And finally, there are issues of topology and bottlenecks and so forth that also make a difference in the effectiveness of an attack. We are looking at a set of different approaches to mitigation. The one I'm going to give you a couple graphs on is proof of work, where the attacker or whoever is sending traffic has to do a certain amount of work. Typically, they're running a hash function over part of the packet that is unique to that packet plus a nonce. They do this repeatedly, getting values, trying to reach a threshold. So the more times they run it, the more likely they are to reach that threshold. So we run a set of experiments. We choose a set of applications that we're going to do this over. We choose a protocol that is the attack vehicle. We choose topologies and so forth. And then we run a series of experiments where nothing is going wrong, which gives us our baseline traffic. We run another set of experiments with the mitigation turned on, but nothing else happening to understand the overhead of the mitigation. We run the attack without any mitigation to understand the threat. And finally, we run it with everything turned on and look at the difference, and that gives us the efficacy of the utilization of that. So here's just a couple of graphs that we look at. I'm just going to look at the right-hand graph because the left-hand one is in the right-hand one, we've got 3 different applications we're running. We're running the hash function once, 64, and 256 times. And we're looking at the percentage of the baseline of the efficacy. And what we see is that at 256 rounds of running that hash function, we get 100% of efficacy in this kind of thing. And what we have managed to do by doing this is turn the problem around, put the burden of the work onto the attackers rather than on the victims themselves. The very last point I want to make is that in the end, what we really hope is that we'll be able to transform the design of protocols to make them more denial of service resistant.